A single gunshot echoes through the snow-smothered streets of Dust Creek, 1882, shattering the life of Eliza Merrick, a woman wagered like a prize in a poker game gone wrong. Bound by her father's betrayal, she stands defiant, a child on her back, facing Silas Boone, a scarred ex-mercenary who won her but refuses to claim her. Their fates collide in a storm of blood, snow, and secrets, forging an unbreakable bond that could either save or doom them both. Will courage triumph over vengeance? Drop a comment with where you're listening from and hit subscribe to unravel their journey. A tale of redemption that'll keep you guessing until the end. Snow fell like ash over Dust Creek, 1882, cloaking the saloon's warped boards in a ghostly shroud. Inside the Eagle's Den, lamplight flickered across scarred tables, casting jagged shadows on men hunched over whiskey and regret. The air reeked of stale smoke and desperation, thick enough to choke on. At the center of it all, a poker game burned hotter than the coal stove in the corner. Silas Boone, a man with a mercenary's past and a scar snaking down his neck like a dry creek bed, sat across from Jonas Merrick, whose eyes glinted with the reckless pride of a man who'd cheated death too many times. Silas wasn't here for gold or glory. He wanted Red Creek, the land where his Apache foster brother's blood had soaked the earth, stolen by Merrick's greed years ago. The table between them was littered with chips, crumpled bills, and a single land deed, its edges curling like a dying leaf. Merrick, half drunk, leaned back, his grin sharp as a Bowie knife. "One last hand, Boone," he slurred. "You want the land? I'll raise you something sweeter. If I lose, you get Red Creek, and my daughter, Eliza." The room went still. Even the piano player's fingers froze mid-note. Silas's steel-gray eyes narrowed, his voice low as a rattlesnake's hiss. "I don't wager flesh, Merrick." "Everything's got a price here," Merrick shot back, tossing his cards down. The crowd held its breath as the final card flipped, a king of spades that sealed Silas's victory. The deed was his, but the weight of Merrick's words hung heavier than the iron on Silas's hip. He gathered the paper with hands steady as stone, his face unreadable. But inside, something cracked. He'd won the land. But at what cost? Dawn broke, gray and merciless, the snow piling higher outside the livery stable where Silas cinched his horse's saddle. Hoofbeats crunched closer, and he turned to see a figure emerge from the blizzard. A woman, slight but unyielding, a child strapped to her back in a faded shawl. Eliza Merrick's honey-brown hair whipped in the wind, her blue eyes sharp enough to cut through the storm. She clutched a folded paper, its wax seal glinting dully, and in her other hand, a pistol, his father's, stolen by Merrick years ago, the B etched into its grip like a brand. "My father sold his honor," she said, voice steady despite the cold biting her lips. "But I'm no man's debt. I came to return what's yours, and to take back justice." Silas studied her, the weight of her words heavier than the gun she offered. She wasn't trembling from fear, but from something fiercer, like a spark waiting to ignite kindling. Before he could answer, a gunshot cracked through the town, sharp as a whip. Shouts followed, boots pounding the frozen street. The sheriff's voice bellowed, "Jonas Merrick's dead. Boone, you're wanted." Silas's jaw tightened. He hadn't fired a shot, but Dust Creek didn't care about truth, only blood. The noose was already being knotted. Eliza's gaze didn't waver. "They say you killed him," she said, stepping closer, the child on her back stirring softly. "Did you?" Silas met her eyes, seeing no fear, only a demand for answers. "No," he said, the word rough as gravel, "but someone wants me to swing for it." The paper in her hand, a contract signed by a drunken judge, named him her guardian, a twisted mockery of Merrick's bet. She thrust it toward him, along with the pistol. "This is yours. Use it to prove you're not the killer." Hooves thundered closer. The sheriff's posse was circling, their lanterns cutting through the snow like wolves' eyes. Silas grabbed the pistol, its weight familiar yet bitter, and tucked the contract into his coat. "You don't know me," he said. "Why help?" Eliza's lips pressed thin. "Because my father took everything from me, too. If you hang, his debt dies with you. I won't let that happen." A shout broke their standoff, deputies closing in. Silas swung onto his horse, extending a hand. "You and the kid, come with me. Now." Eliza hesitated, then grabbed his arm, pulling herself and the child up behind him. The horse surged forward, snow spraying as they tore out of Dust Creek. The posse's bullets sang past, biting into fence posts and frozen earth. Silas leaned low, Eliza's arms tight around his waist. The child's soft weight pressed against his back. The blizzard swallowed their trail, but not their pursuers. They rode hard, the wind a knife against their faces, until Dust Creek was a memory buried in white. Silas didn't know if Eliza was his salvation or his damnation. But one thing was clear. This woman, wagered like a pawn, was no one's prize. She'd chosen to ride into hell with him, and that choice bound them tighter than any card game ever could. The blizzard howled like a wounded beast, clawing at Silas Boone's coat as he urged his horse through the frozen wastes beyond Dust Creek. Eliza Merrick clung to him, her arms a steel band around his waist, the child on her back silent but heavy as a stone. The posse's lanterns had faded into the storm, but their pursuit lingered like a shadow. Night swallowed the trail, leaving only the crunch of hooves on snow and the scream of wind cutting through the pines. Silas's shoulder burned where the cold bit into old scars, but he kept his eyes forward, scanning for shelter. They couldn't outrun the storm forever. The horse stumbled, its breath steaming in ragged clouds. Silas reined it toward a cluster of cedars, their branches sagging under snow like mourners at a grave. "We stop here," he growled, voice barely carrying over the gale. Eliza slid down, cradling the child, her face pale but unyielding. She didn't argue, just moved to gather broken branches for a fire. Silas watched her, marveling at the grit in this woman who'd been wagered like a saloon bet. He shook off the thought and tethered the horse, its flanks shivering under his gloved hand. They built a lean-to from cedar boughs, the fire spitting sparks into the dark. The child stirred, eyes wide, and Eliza hummed softly, a tune older than the hills, to calm him. Silas crouched by the flames, checking his father's pistol. The B on its grip gleamed, a reminder of debts unpaid. "You trust me to get us through this?" he asked, not looking up. Eliza's gaze was steady as iron. "I trust you're not fool enough to die in this storm. That's enough for now." A howl split the night. Not wind, but something alive and hungry. Silas's hand tightened on the gun. Another howl answered, closer, from the direction of a frozen creek bed below. He stood, peering into the white void. Shadows moved, gray shapes, low and lean, eyes glinting like coins in the firelight. Wolves, 6, maybe 7, circling the glow. Eliza froze, clutching the child. Silas counted his bullets. 5. Not enough if the pack is charged. Before he could speak, a groan came from the creek bed. Not animal. Human. Silas squinted, spotting a slumped figure half buried in snow, blood staining the ice around it. "Stay here," he told Eliza, stepping toward the sound, gun raised. The wolves snarled, their breath steaming, but didn't advance. The figure moved, a gloved hand clawing at the snow. Silas recognized the beaded jacket. Apache work. "Tahan," he whispered, heart lurching. His old friend, the warrior who'd sheltered him when he deserted the army, lay bleeding out. Silas fired a shot into the air, the crack scattering the wolves momentarily. He slid down the bank, boots skidding on ice, and knelt beside Tahan. The man's face was gray, a gash across his chest weeping red. "Boone," Tahan rasped, "you're still a damn fool." Silas grinned despite himself, tearing his scarf to bind the wound. But the wolves were closing in again, their growls a low thunder. He dragged Tahan toward the fire, cursing as his damp cartridges misfired. Eliza didn't wait for orders. She set the child in the lean-to, wrapped in her shawl, and snatched a burning branch from the fire. "Get him up!" she shouted, charging the wolves. Her torch slashed through the dark, flames hissing as snow melted on contact. The pack recoiled, startled by her ferocity, her hair whipping like a banner in the wind. She stomped the ground, shouting Apache words she must have overheard from Tahan's kin, driving the beasts back. Silas hauled Tahan to the fire, his hands slick with blood and ice. Eliza returned, torch still blazing, her chest heaving, but eyes fierce. Tahan coughed, gripping Silas's arm. "Red Creek, it's why they want me dead. The water, it's sacred." His words were a lifeline, tying Silas's past to this frozen moment. Eliza knelt, checking Tahan's wound with steady hands. "He'll live if we move fast," she said. Silas nodded, awed by her nerve. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for him. And that kid." The child cooed, safe in the lean-to, a spark of hope in the cold. As the wolves' howls faded, Silas felt the weight of their survival. "If this story's gripping you," Eliza's voice seemed to echo in his mind. "Drop a comment with where you're listening from and hit subscribe. There's more to this fight than snow and wolves. Stick with us to see how it unfolds." The fire crackled, and Tahan's ragged breathing steadied. They were bound now, 3 souls in a storm, carrying secrets heavier than the snow piling around them. Red Creek called, and with it, a truth that could either save them or bury them all. The fire's last embers hissed under the snow's weight, leaving Silas, Eliza, and Tahan huddled in the lean-to, the child's soft breaths a faint rhythm against the storm's wail. Red Creek's truth burned in Silas's mind. Sacred water, a murdered brother, a deputy's betrayal. They had to move before the posse, or the cold claimed them. Tahan, weak but stubborn, pointed north toward a hidden valley. "The creek runs there," he rasped. "Under ice, where my people pray." Silas nodded, hauling the warrior to his feet. Eliza secured the child, her face etched with resolve, and they broke camp, the wind slicing through their coats like a skinning knife. The trail wound through jagged cliffs, the snowdrift swallowing their tracks. Silas led, his horse's hooves cracking ice, while Eliza followed, her boots sinking deep. Tahan, slung across the saddle, muttered Apache prayers, his voice a thread tying them to the land. The valley opened below, a bowl of white ringed by pines, the frozen creek glinting like a buried blade. Silas dismounted, scanning for signs of pursuit. The storm had bought them time, but Dust Creek's hounds weren't far behind. Tahan slid down, pointing to a slab of rock jutting from the snow. "There," he said, breath clouding. "The water's heart." Silas and Eliza cleared the snow, revealing a crevice where ice gleamed over a faint trickle. Tahan knelt, pressing his hand to the stone. "This is why Danton killed Merrick. The railroad wants the Red Creek dammed for their steam engines. My people will die without it." His eyes burned into Silas. "You know what it's like to lose kin to greed." Silas's scar throbbed, a ghost of his brother's death. He turned to Eliza, expecting her to falter, but her jaw was set, her hand steady as she adjusted the child's shawl. "What's the plan?" she asked, voice sharp as flint. Silas gripped his pistol, the bee cold under his thumb. We go back, expose Danton before he sells the land. Tahan nodded, but his face darkened. He's got men, hired guns. They'll be waiting. The journey back was a gauntlet. The storm eased, but the cold tightened its grip, frosting their breath and numbing their fingers. They followed the creek's path, its frozen surface a guide through the wilderness. By dusk, they reached a narrow gorge where a rope bridge swayed over a chasm, its planks rotted and slick. Silas tested the ropes, their fibers fraying under his grip. "We cross one at a time," he said. "Me first." He stepped onto the bridge, boards groaning under his weight. Halfway across, a rifle shot rang out, splintering wood near his boots. Ambush. Silas dropped to a crouch, scanning the cliffs. Shadows moved, 3 hired guns, their rifles glinting. "Eliza, down!" he shouted, drawing his pistol. She dove behind a boulder, shielding the child as bullets kicked up snow. Tahan, too weak to fight, crawled to cover, his knife gleaming in his hand. Silas fired back, his shots wild, but enough to make the gunman hesitate. The bridge swayed, ropes creaking like a gallows. Eliza peeked out, her eyes scanning the gorge. "There's another way around," she called, pointing to a ledge along the cliff. Silas shook his head. "Too slow. We cross now." He waved her forward, covering her as she stepped onto the bridge, the child strapped tight to her back. The ropes shuddered and a plank snapped beneath her foot. She stumbled, the chasm yawning below. Silas lunged, grabbing the rope harness of the child's shawl. His hands bled as the coarse fibers tore into his palms, but he held fast, pulling Eliza and the child to safety. She collapsed beside him, breath ragged, her eyes meeting his with a fire that matched the valley's hidden pulse. "Keep moving," he growled, helping her up. Tahan followed, slower, his wound slowing him but not his will. The gunfire stopped, the ambushers retreating into the dusk. Silas led them across the bridge, holding just long enough. On the other side, they found a cave, its mouth hidden by snow-laden pines. Inside, they lit a small fire, the smoke curling toward the ceiling like spirits escaping. Eliza tended Tahan's wound, her fingers deft despite the cold. "Why'd you risk that bridge?" she asked Silas, her voice low. He stared into the flames. "Because Red Creek's not just land. It's blood. Mine. Tahan's. Maybe yours now." "Danton doesn't get to take it." She nodded, understanding more than he expected. The child slept, clutching a smooth stone Tahan had slipped into his tiny hand, a piece of Red Creek's heart. Silas watched them, the weight of their survival settling like dust after a stampede. Dust Creek loomed ahead, its lies waiting to be unraveled. The truth was close, but so was the noose, and Silas knew the next step would cost more than blood. The cave's fire dwindled to ash, but the weight of Red Creek's truth smoldered in Silas Boone's chest. Dust Creek lay half a day's ride south, its streets a trap waiting to snap shut. He glanced at Eliza, her hand steady as she wrapped Tahan's wound, the child asleep against her shoulder. The noose was tightening, but the fight for justice burned hotter than fear. Dawn broke, painting the sky blood red, and they mounted up, Tahan's strength returning like a slow-kindled flame. Silas led, his father's pistol heavy at his hip, the B a silent vow to end this rite. Dust Creek emerged from the haze, its rooftops dusted with fresh snow. The town buzzed, wagons creaking as railroad men in stiff suits gathered outside the saloon. Silas reined his horse behind a derelict barn, scanning the crowd. Eliza dismounted, clutching the torn contract that branded her a pawn. "They're signing the land away today," she said, voice low but sharp as a spur. Tahan, leaning on his horse, nodded toward the saloon's swinging doors. "Danton's there. End him, or he ends us." They slipped through back alleys, boots crunching on frozen mud. The town square was a stage, and townsfolk clustered like vultures around a carcass. At its center stood Earl Danton, deputy sheriff, his leather coat gleaming like snake scales. He held a fresh deed, waving it to the railroad men, his smile cold as a winter moon. Silas's scar itched, his fingers twitching toward his gun. Eliza's hand on his arm stopped him. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let them see the truth first." She stepped into the square, the child strapped to her back, her chin high. The crowd parted, murmurs rippling like wind through sagebrush. Silas and Tahan flanked her, shadows in the morning light. Eliza raised the torn contract, its edges frayed like her father's honor. "This paper," she called, voice cutting through the chatter, "was signed in a drunken haze, sealed with my father's blood. Danton killed him to steal Red Creek for the railroad. It's a lie, and I'll prove it." Danton's eyes narrowed, his hand drifting to his holster. "You're a fool, girl," he spat. "Your father lost that land fair. Step back, or you'll join him." The railroad men shifted, uneasy, their pens hovering over the deed. Silas stepped forward, his presence a wall of quiet menace. "She's no fool," he said, voice rough as gravel. "And I didn't kill Merrick. You did." The crowd stilled, the air thick with the promise of violence. Danton laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and drew his revolver. "You're a dead man, Boone." Silas didn't flinch. He wanted the truth laid bare before blood spilled. "Shoot me then," he said, hands open, pistol untouched. "But they'll know you're scared of what we found at Red Creek." Danton's finger tightened on the trigger. The crowd held its breath, eyes darting between the deputy and the trio. The shot came, a crack that split the morning. Pain seared Silas's shoulder, blood blooming through his coat. He staggered but held his ground, teeth gritted. Eliza gasped, clutching the child, but Tahan stepped forward, his knife gleaming like a shard of moonlight. "He's no killer," Tahan growled, his Apache accent thick. "You are." The crowd murmured, doubt creeping into their faces. Danton's smile faltered, his gun wavering. Silas seized the moment. His left hand, steady despite the pain, drew his father's pistol. The bee caught the sun as he aimed, not at Danton's head, but his heart. "You killed Merrick to bury Red Creek's water," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "The Apache needed to live. You'd let them die for a railroad's coin." Danton's face twisted, and he fired again, but the shot went wide, grazing a hitching post. Silas pulled the trigger. The bullet struck true, punching through Danton's chest. The deputy crumpled, the fake deed fluttering to the snow like a dead bird. Blood pooled, staining the white ground red. The crowd stood frozen, the railroad men backing away, their deal shattered. Silas sank to one knee, clutching his shoulder. Eliza knelt beside him, her hands quick to tear a strip from her shawl, pressing it to his wound. "Stay with me," she said, her voice a lifeline. Tahan stood guard, his presence a silent warning to any who'd challenge them. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, his face grim but not hostile. "Boone," he said, "you'd better have proof." Eliza held up the torn contract, its ink smudged, but damning. "This is proof," she said. "Danton forged it. Red Creek belongs to no one man." The sheriff nodded, taking the paper, his eyes on Silas. "You're clear, Boone, but don't expect a parade." Silas met Eliza's gaze, her strength anchoring him. The child stirred, safe in her arms. Red Creek's secret was out, but the fight wasn't over. The railroad's shadow loomed, and justice was a fragile thing in Dust Creek. Silas stood, pain be damned, knowing they'd face whatever came next together. Dust Creek's streets lay quiet, the blood in the snow washed away by a fresh thaw. Silas Boone stood, shoulder bandaged, his father's pistol tucked away. its B no longer a weight, but a marker of battles won. Eliza Merrick, the child still strapped to her back, held the torn contract like a shield, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Red Creek's waters ran free. The railroad men had slunk away, their deal dead with Danton, but the town's gaze lingered, some in awe, some in fear. Justice had come, but at a cost. Spring was stirring, and with it, a chance to rebuild or break anew. The sun climbed higher, melting the last ice from the rooftops. Eliza led Silas and Tahan to a low hill overlooking Dust Creek, where the courthouse stood, its weathered steeple a lone sentinel. Inside, the county judge, sober for once, pored over the torn contract. His spectacles glinted as he muttered about fraud and blood money. "Red Creek's no man's to claim," he declared, stamping a new decree. "It's held in trust for the Apache and the town. Miss Merrick, you'll steward it." Eliza's breath caught, her hand tightening on the child's shawl. She nodded, not with pride, but with the weight of duty. They walked to a cabin on the town's edge, its timbers gray but sturdy, gifted by the Apache as thanks. Tahan, his wound healing, knelt by the hearth, carving a small stone into a smooth oval for the child. "Tzani Kohane," he said, placing it in the boy's tiny hand. "Mother of water. That's what they call you now." Eliza's lips curved, not a smile, but a quiet acceptance. She set the child down, his fingers clutching the stone, its surface catching the light like the creek itself. Silas watched, leaning against the doorframe, his shoulders stiff, but his heart lighter. The cabin smelled of pine and fresh earth, a far cry from the saloon's sour reek. Eliza moved with purpose, hanging a faded quilt, her hand steady but her eyes distant. "You didn't have to stay," Silas said, breaking the silence. "You could have walked away, taken the kid somewhere new." She turned, her gaze sharp as a hawk's. "And let Red Creek die, or you swing for a crime you didn't commit. I chose this, Boone, not for you, but for what's right." Her words landed like a stone in still water. Silas stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his boots. "You're not what I expected," he admitted, voice rough as sagebrush. "Thought you'd be broken, being bet like that." Eliza's eyes softened, but her spine stayed straight. "My father broke plenty, but not me. I chose to fight, for this kid, for Tahan's people, for the truth." She paused, brushing hair from her face. "And maybe for you, too." The air shifted, heavy with unspoken things. Silas's scar tingled, not with pain but memory. His brother. The creek. The years of running. He wanted to reach for her, but his hands stayed still, respecting the space she'd claimed. Outside, a train whistle keened. The first tracks laid beyond Dust Creek, a new era creeping in. Eliza stepped to the window, sunlight gilding her hair like the torch she'd wielded against wolves. "The railroad's coming," she said. "They'll try again. But Red Creek stays free." Tahan stood, his knife sheathed. "My people will guard it with you," he said, his voice a low drum. "But the fight's not over. Men like Danton always come back." Silas nodded, feeling the weight of his gun again. "Then we'll be ready." The child cooed, rolling the stone across the floor, oblivious to the world's hunger for what he'd inherit. That evening, Eliza sat on the cabin's porch, the child asleep in her lap. The sky burned gold, the creek's distant rush a quiet hymn. Silas joined her, his shadow long across the boards. "You're staying, then?" he asked, not looking at her. She didn't answer right away, her fingers tracing the stone in the child's hand. "I'm staying," she said finally. "Not because I was won, but because I chose what matters. This land, this boy, this fight." Silas met her eyes, seeing the fire that had saved them in the snow. And me? He asked, half expecting a barb. Her gaze held steady. You're part of it now, Boone, like it or not. A train's rumble echoed in the distance, but her voice rose above it, soft but unyielding. No one owns anyone. Only the living belong to those who protect them. The words settled between them, a vow as binding as any deed, carrying them toward a future forged in choice, not chance. The dust of Dust Creek settles, but Eliza's choice, to fight, to protect, to rise above betrayal, echoes beyond the horizon. Her story, woven with Silas and Tahan's, proves no one is owned, only claimed by their own courage. What did this tale stir in you? Drop your thoughts below. Where are you listening from, and what hit you hardest? Your voice keeps this fire alive. I'm grateful for you joining this ride through snow and blood. Stay tuned for more stories that cut deep and lift high. Until we meet again, keep the spark of justice burning.